Welcome to our discussion of leprosy, identity, and Yom Haatzmaut. If you ask yourself, why do we have leprosy? So everybody knows it's because of Lashon Hara, because you shouldn't speak Lashon Hara, slanderous, gossipy speech, and tattletaling. And if you do, then you get leprosy. At least in the olden days when God was more omnipresent with the Jewish people. The people in the land of Israel would get this leprosy, very strange kind of thing, was an inexplicable type of disease they had in those days. So that's what it says. But then you say, well, then why does Moshe Rabbeinu get it? Was he talking Lashon Hara? So some people say he was. We'll have to take a look. And you say, well, why does Uzziah get it? There's a king who brings incense when he wasn't a Kohen. What does that got to do with Lashon Hara? Naman, the general who got leprosy in the Haftorah, was he slanderous? Was anything slanderous that he said? There's just a lot of questions, a lot of stories that don't fit into that theory that it's just for Lashon Hara. As a matter of fact, the Gemara has, we'll see later, Gemara says that there are other sins for which leprosy comes. So what is it really all about? And then there's the good leprosy. Like Rashi says, sometimes you get leprosy and then you find out that you have treasures under your house. Well, you get rewarded with the treasure. If you speak Lashon Hara, then you get the leprosy on your house, and then you get a treasure under your house. What's going on? So we have to explain the good leprosy as well. So let's take a look at all these different sources. I'll try to go through every time the leprosy is mentioned in Tanakh, and just briefly, and hopefully it'll give us an answer to an overarching theory of leprosy. So we want to talk about leprosy, identity, and then we want to tie it into Yom Haatzmaut. After all, today's Yom Haatzmaut. The Shabbos would have been Yom Haatzmaut, 5th of Iyar, had it not been for Shabbat. So let's try to tie it into that as well. It often falls on Tazria Metzor, the Parsha that talks about leprosy. So first, Moshe the Leper. How did Moshe become a leper? Well, look at the context a little bit. Moshe says, look, the Jews are not going to believe me. They'll say, God didn't appear to me. Appear to you? And then Hashem said to him, look, what do you have in your hand? He says, a staff. He said, all right, take it and throw it. And it turned into a snake, and then he turned into a staff. And he says they'll believe you. And he says, also put your hand in your bosom and take it out, and hear that, and behold, lo and behold, it was like leprosy. So Rashi says he did speak Lashon Hara. What did he say wrong? He said they won't believe me. So, and that's a big problem. That in the end, Moshe is punished because he said, you didn't believe in me. The Jews are Ma'aminim, they always believe, but you're the ones who didn't believe in me when you hit the rock twice. So that's the simple answer, that yes, it is a case of Lashon Hara, but it's not the only thing that goes on there. I mean, there's a lot of things that Moshe says at the burning bush, aside from just that the Jews are not going to believe me. It's not only that he slandered. There's a more basic story going on there, the burning bush. We'll have to understand, what is it, and what has it got to do with leprosy? Then, as I said, we have the good old leprosy. We have leprosy that's good, and it's old. Right? When you come to the land of Israel, I will give you a leprosy. So Rashi says, is that what you tell me? You're going to marry a new wife and then she'll have leprosy. You're going to have a new job and you'll have leprosy. What kind of? I mean, because all the Jews are going to talk Lashon Hara? So Rashi says, no, it's an announcement that the plagues would come upon them because the Amorites, the Canaanites, concealed treasures of gold in the walls of their houses. During the whole time the Israelites were in the wilderness, because they knew that Israel would take over. And in consequence of a plague, they would have a plague. The Kohen would say, you have to knock down the house. They'd knock down the wall or the house, and then they would find the treasure behind the wall. And actually, this is not a plague, it's actually a reward. We have to understand, what does that got to do? We have to have a unified theory of leprosy. If leprosy is a punishment for slander, how can it be a reward for finding treasures in your house? And what has it got to do with Moshe at the burning bush? Why is he getting leprosy? He's not a bad guy. What's going on? We have Miriam the leper. Again, whole video about really is Miriam the ultimate lashon hara person that forevermore we should always remember Miriam spoke lashon hara. Don't speak lashon hara. Is that how we remember Miriam? I mean, how could God do that to Miriam? I mean, a lot of people probably spoke lashon hara. We have to focus on Miriam. What's going on? What happened? Miriam and Moshe spoke against Moshe about the wife he took from Cush, and they said, "Did God only speak to us?" He spoke. God didn't only speak to Moshe; He spoke to us too. So Hashem heard what they said, and now Moshe was very modest. And then Hashem said to Moshe and Aaron and Miriam, "Come on out till the tent of the meeting." So they go out there, and he called Aaron and Miriam, and they went out, and he said, "Listen to me. There may be prophets, but I speak to prophets in riddles and in visions, but not so Moshe. Moshe knows everything in my whole house, and I speak to him mouth to mouth, face to face. I don't speak to him in metaphors, in riddles like some of the prophets. What do you see? Oh, I see a menorah. Oh, the menorah represents this, right? There's no riddles. Why weren't you afraid to speak against Moshe? So then the cloud went away, and Miriam was a leprous. So it's true, Miriam spoke lashon hara, but is that all she did? Isn't there something else that she did there? It's another kind of sin that's going on there. We need to think about that. And what does that got to do with the overarching theory of leprosy? So again, we could explain Moshe lashon hara. The house, it's hard to fit in with lashon hara. I mean, you speak lashon hara, and then you get a prize for speaking lashon hara. Difficult. Miriam, you could certainly say she spoke lashon hara, but how are we going to connect it with the house? Then we have the leprosy of Naman. Last week's, this coming week's Torah, we have Naman. What happened? So I don't have the whole story here because it's a long story. I'll go over it on Shabbos, but this is the key line I wanted to emphasize. What's the story? The story goes like this. So once upon a time, there was a little girl who was taken captive, and her host was the wife, the woman that she worked for as a slave. Her mistress was the wife of a leper, and the leper was the great general in Aram, up in northern Syria area, and he was an enemy of Israel, and he was a leper. So he was a big guy, but he was a leper. So he was very successful militarily, very unsuccessful socially as a leper, but he was married. And surely I can imagine, the women are talking in the coffee clutch, and it's no secret that her husband is a leper, and it's kind of disgusting. So this little girl who's a slave, talking among the women, she says, "Well, what's the problem? You go to a prophet in Israel, and he'll cure you from your leprosy." Who's that? Elisha. Elisha can cure anything. He's a prophet. He's a miracle worker. So go to him, and he'll solve your problem. So Elisha is so the general. He doesn't know how's he going to find a prophet in Israel. So he tells the king, I want to speak to the prophet. The king said, "I don't know how to speak to the prophet. I'll speak to the king." So the king of Aram, who's an enemy, very powerful enemy, sends a letter to the king of Israel. Doesn't say his name, it's probably Yoram. And he says to him, "I'm sending you Naaman. You have to cure him from his leprosy." The king, being an atheist, being a non-believer, he says, "What am I going to do?" He rips his clothes. "What am I going to do? How am I going to cure this guy from leprosy? What am I, God? I'm going to save him from his leprosy? He's just coming to kill me. He's going to say, cure my leprosy or I'll kill you." And he's going to kill me. So what am I going to do? So he's very upset. Of course, it made headlines. Everybody found out that the king ripped his clothes. So Elisha, the prophet, he says, you fool. Don't you know there's a prophet in Israel? What do you? The little girl knows there's a prophet in Israel. Don't you know there's a prophet in Israel? What do you? You bring him over here, I'll take care of him. Comes over there, and strangely enough, Elisha doesn't want to meet the general. Who wants to meet Arafat? Who wants to meet the guy who's killing all the Jews at the Nasser, right? Who's the enemy of Israel? Who wants to meet him? So he says, "Look, jump in the river 7 times. Go jump in the lake 7 times. You'll be cured. Get out of here." At that point, Naman reacts. And here we get a sense of what's wrong with Naman, this general. Naman got angry and he went away. He walked away from the prophet. And he said, I thought I would come out. He would come out and he would stand and call out the name of the tetragrammaton of God and his God. And then he would wave his hand and then I'd be cured. So he says, I've got much bigger Amana and Parpar. They've got beautiful lakes and rivers in my country, much better than any of the lakes around here. I'll go dunk in them and I'll be purified. I'm getting out of here. And he turns away and he goes. And his servants say, sir, you're our father, they call him, they all see that he's a leper. I mean, it's no secret, right? That this guy's a leper. Not a big deal. He's asking you, just go dunk in the river. I mean, everybody knows that there's a prophet in Israel and he does all kinds of miracles. So, if he says dunk in the river, you dunk in the river. I mean, what a big deal. I mean, go dunk. So he says, all right, fine. So interestingly enough, he listens to everybody else. He dunks in there, comes out, his skin is like a baby. Comes over, he wants to give a big present to the prophet, and the story goes on. So you say, what's wrong with this guy? He's a leper. Why is he a leper? We don't know. We never met this guy. But now, when he comes to get his cure, we get a glimpse into him, and he says, I thought the prophet was going to come out to greet me. He's going to snub me and not even talk to me. I thought he would tell me to do some sort of impressive act in front of me as a magic act. But now he tells me to dunk in the rivers. You think I don't have rivers like this in my country? This country, that the Jordan River is a very small river. People make jokes. I mean, it's a beautiful river. It's nice. But it's really more like the Wolf River than it is the Mississippi River. Okay, Wolf River, those of you who don't know, is a little creek over here. That's what it's like. It's really not very impressive. So he says, it's a joke. And here we get into a bit of Yom Haatzmaut. Is he questioning the beauty of the land of Israel? So is there something about Naman what quality would you describe that as? What qualities does Naman have when he says, what? I thought he was going to come out and greet me. I thought he was going to wave his hand and that's it. I'm going to dunk in these little puny river over here. I'm going to go dunk in my river. I got beautiful rivers up there. What quality do you see in this man? Think about that.
I was going to say, definitely not, at least persistence. He's not humble, or doesn't seem to be, but at least he showed up. He made the trip. He went and dunked, even if he doubted it.
Let's, there's a lot of impressive things about him, but in terms of things to criticize, he is not humble. Okay?
No, not at all.
He thinks he deserves a big greeting from the holy man, right? So, and he thinks that his rivers are better than our rivers. Okay. So he's not humble, and there's something about Israel there as well. Okay. Now, so let's put that in our pocket. Let's go on to our next case. Again, looking for a unified theory of leprosy. And we've got this guy, he's got leprosy. He's not talking Lashon Hara. Maybe he spoke against Israel. Maybe he said that his rivers are better than our rivers. We have to think about that. Okay. Then we have the 4 lepers. Shortly after that story, where the general tries to give money to Elisha. Elisha refuses the money. Then Gehazi, Elisha's helper, accepted the money, thereby embarrassing the prophet and ruining the whole story. So Elisha said that you and your children will always be lepers. Perhaps it was those people who were lepers at the gates, and they say, look, we're lepers. There's a terrible famine. We're dying over here. And there's a whole city over there of the enemy camp. They probably have food. Let's turn ourselves into the enemy. If they kill us, we're going to die anyway. Who cares? And if they don't kill us, we'll get some food. So let's go. So they go to the enemy. When they get there, they discover that the enemy ran away and they left all their food. And they sit there just like cartoon characters, just eating all the food by themselves. These 4 people, 4 lepers, eating all the food. And then they say, you know what? I think maybe we should tell the Jews that there's food outside the city because they're all dying of starvation in the siege. So they told the Jews, and the Jews, there was a stampede. People killed somebody in the stampede, and they got their food, and the whole siege was over. So these lepers, what does that got to do? Why would these people have leprosy, and what does it got to do with the unified theory of leprosy? What is the unified theory of leprosy? We'll have to come back to it. Then we have Uzziyahu, very prominent among the stories of lepers is Uzziyahu, because we know a lot about Uzziyahu, and we know that he got leprosy. What happened? He decides one day he wants to bring the Ketoret. All the bad guys always bring Ketoret. Uzziyahu's not a bad guy. Uzziyahu was a great, righteous king of Israel, but he was so religious, he wanted to get involved in the religious ceremony. So, Nadav and Avihu, the sons of Aaron, they brought the incense on the altar, and they got killed. Korach wanted to bring the incense. So he also brought so he comes with his incense, and he's the king. What, are you going to stop the king? So he's in charge, right? It's good to be king, right? You could kill them all. So he says, I'm bringing my incense. So the Kohanim say, they have a showdown. The Kohanim say, hey. He says, Lo lecha Uzziyahu latil Hashem. It's not for you. You're the king. You can do anything you want in the country. You can take all the women you want. You can steal all the food. You can take the taxes all you want. But one thing you can't do, it's not your job to bring the sacrifices, to bring the incense. Only for Aaron, the sons of Aaron, the holy people, you'd be trespassing. It's not honor for you. So he's about to do it, and he gets really mad he gets really mad. Now don't forget the last story also we got mad, and all of a sudden he breaks out in leprosy on his face, on his forehead, and he has to run away in shame. And the rest of his presidency, he lived out. His son kind of took over, and he lived somewhere else where they would, in his gazebo, trying to recuperate from the leprosy. So what is it about Uzziyahu? He became a great king. He did it very, very successful. And then he wants to bring Ketoret. So what quality is that? Now, indeed, the Gemara in Erechin says, anybody who speaks Lashon Hara, the evil, slanderous tongue, he'll get plagues. It usually means the physical plagues, which kind of means leprosy. There are other types of leprosies. Not all of them are called leprosy. Some are shechin. So different things. So, and he proves it from a verse. The Rambam goes full nose dive into this. At the conclusion of the laws of leprosy, he says, this is a special thing. It's not a real, disease like we have today. A special thing only in those days, and special Ot Vavel B'Yisrael was a sign. It was a wonder that the Jews had, so that everybody would know that if you speak Lashon Hara, your walls will change. If you improved, then fine. And if you didn't, then God would get your garments. Finally, he would get you. And then you would be the leper. And then you would be sent out of the community, and you wouldn't, hang out with other people, and you learn your lesson. So, you shouldn't sit around and gossip, and it's a terrible thing. And after a while, you're sitting around gossiping, you'll end out talking against God, against the prophets. So you shouldn't do that. So definitely the Rambam is definitely into this theme of the leprosy for Lashon Hara. I think we just want to expand it a little bit so we can cover all these cases. Now the Gemara in Erechin throws in the kitchen sink. Another Gemara in Erechin says, he quotes Rabbi Yonasan. It's always Yonasan. There are 7 things for which you get different types of leprosy. Lashon Hara, we spoke about. Shvichas Dam for murder. They have all the big 3: murder, idolatry. I'm sorry, they don't mention idolatry, but immorality, and gasus haruach, also for haughtiness, and for theft, and for stinginess. So I can't explain all these. I don't know. I can't explain all of them, but it's interesting to note that it does mention haughtiness. Haughtiness. I'll have to think about that, about the haughtiness, because we did see some haughtiness in some of our stories. In fact, Rashi, in explaining the different, many rituals that are connected with our parsha, it's a very long double parsha this week, and almost all of it except for a little bit at the end, a little bit at the beginning, is talking about the leper of one sort or another. And he says, well, how come when the leper becomes purified, birds? He says, well, leprosy comes for Lashon Hara, and who does a lot of chirping and talking? Birds. So you bring a bird to atone. And you also have to take a piece of cedar wood. Cedar wood, why? Because the plagues come for haughtiness. Rashi is telling us that these are the two main things, Lashon Hara and haughtiness. And then how do you heal yourself, cure yourself of haughtiness? You have to lower yourself. And that's why one of the sacrifices brought when you're cured is Shni Tolad. You bring a worm because you have to lower yourself like a worm. The Tzror Hamor, Rabbi Avram Siban, from Spain, Portugal, and North Africa, he says he has to shave all his hair. When the leper is done being a leper, he shaves off all his hair, his eyebrows, everything. He says, why? And there are certain exceptions, by the way. But anyway, why? Because it's a way of purifying yourself. And it also is a matter of degradation. Because your hair is your honor, you know. I've got a nice head of hair, and I've got a nice haircut and everything. Makes you look good. But when you shave your head, it's embarrassing. So it gives him some modesty to cover up his So he says this person had a great haughtiness with his forehead, haughtiness associated with the forehead, as we saw with Uziyahu, with his great haughtiness and his sinfulness. So therefore, he has to sit outside for 7 days, and because of his sin. So there's an idea that the shaving of the hair is also to fight the haughtiness. Shimshon Hirsch is into symbolism. He's very into the laws, and then he explains their symbolism. He says, why is it that at the end the Kohen would sprinkle blood on his big toe and his big finger? What's going on? He says he has to limit his sense of self, his sense of I, right? He has to be more connected to the Kohen, to those who are trying to get closer with a higher authority. He should get involved in the life of the Kohen, just like the Kohen was inaugurated last week, Marsha, with sprinkling on his toes. So too, he should be just like the Kohen. The Kohen models for him what life should be, and therefore he should try to elevate himself. That he should also live a higher life like the Kohen. And I thought this is fascinating, very important lesson. The lesson is that you think a leper is a lowly criminal of sorts, a Jewish criminal. He talks too much slander, right? Maybe he's too haughty. So what's the life of a criminal? You give him a punishment. I say, no. Shimshon Hirsch says, when we give him a ceremony, we're hoping he's going to be one of the holy people now. He's going to be like a Kohen now. We don't send people to jail so when they get out, they can be some verstunkene felon and who can't vote. You send them, you punish someone, and you rehabilitate them so that they can be elevated to the level of everyone else, of the judge himself. That's the goal. And same thing with the leper over here. So that's the symbolism of the sprinkling of the blood on the, we're trying to transform the leper to something much higher, but it's specifically because he lowered himself. And maybe he thought he was so hung up on himself, the haughtiness again. Now, the Gemara in Sota says that anyone who has haughtiness in the end will be brought down. So if you have lepers, one of the lowest people, maybe it's because he had haughtiness. And they quote a verse from Eov, where Eov himself says that, according to the Midrashic reading, that Rumo miet, that those who go up, he brings them down. And that led me to sort of think, what about Job? Was Job guilty of haughtiness? Now, you'd say, it depends. I mean, we don't know. Was Job one of the most righteous people who didn't do anything wrong? Which says he's not being haughty. He's just saying, I'm telling you the truth. I never said this before, but now that we're talking about the theology of why I suffered, let me tell you something. I never sinned at anything. I'm a perfect Jew. I'm a perfect, maybe he's not a Jew, a perfect guy. whatever he was. He's a perfect human being. So in that case, he's not haughty. Or do you say, no, he really is imperfect and he is haughty? Or that, no, there's nothing imperfect. It's not that he sinned. He's right. He never sinned. But he thinks he can argue with God. He says, let me talk to God. I want to argue with him. That's the haughtiness. Maybe that's the haughtiness. So it says here that the Satan says he gave him shchin. It's not leprosy. It's a inflammation. Shchin is generally associated with what I called before. Shchin, the boils. Talk about it, the 10 plagues. The shchin is the boils. So he had boils all over his body, and he was trying to scratch it. He had a big back scratcher, and his wife thought his life was basically over. He might as well kill himself. Might as well, get himself killed. So, how do we fit Job into the theory, the overarching theory, the unified theory of leprosy? What has he got to do with it? And is he haughty as well? Now, yeah. So now let's go back and look at it, and I'll share with you the unified theory of leprosy, identity, and Yom Haatzmaut. Moshe the Leper, I would say that the most prominent thing he did before the leprosy, to maybe deserve leprosy, was not so much saying that the Jews won't believe him. That's a function of the fact that his basic argument, which was, why would anyone listen to me? I'm nobody. And that's his basic argument is, I'm not good enough. He's nobody. Let Aaron do it. So in other words, Moshe's biggest quote unquote sin or just mistake was he thought he was nothing. And Hashem is telling him, you think you're nothing, you are something. So I want to claim that it's not that the leprosy is a punishment. The leprosy is a way of bringing out, who are you really? You're not who you think you are. Nobody. You really are somebody. As a matter of fact, you're one of the best people ever. So leprosy is a way of bringing out who you are. In the case of Moshe, he didn't think he was as good as he actually was. Then what about the good old leprosy? It explains it very well. Matter of fact, this is sort of the archetype for my whole theory. That if leprosy uncovers a treasure that lies beneath, then as one of my teachers and mentors pointed out, it's what it's saying is as a human being, as a Jew, you have treasures beneath you. Don't you understand? You have treasures. Uncover them. Take them out. The land of Israel, you think it's just some old dusty land? It's beautiful. It's got treasures in it. You don't appreciate what it is. The leprosy that's good is a leprosy that reveals what lies beneath. Like in Moshe's case, where he didn't realize how good he was. Miriam the leper, it's not that she spoke Lashon Hara. That a lot of people do that. That's not unique to Miriam. Why would we single out Miriam? Why don't they quote me? So pick me, pick someone else. Why do they pick on Miriam that she spoke Lashon Hara? She's the most righteous person. She's a prophet. The answer is that she wasn't. Well, the problem was she thought she was Moses. She was a prophetess, but she wasn't Moses. Aaron is a prophet, but he's not quite Moshe. So that was the haughty. That was where she didn't understand who she was. She needed to understand. Look beneath the surface. You think you're Moses? No, you're not quite Moses. That was a unique problem, that she didn't appreciate the uniqueness of Moshe's prophecy. That's what all the religions don't understand. They think, oh, Moses is very good, but now they have a new prophet. And then the other religion comes up with another prophet. No, we say that Moshe is a unique prophet in all of history. He spoke directly to God. That's it. Nobody else does. So she didn't understand this uniqueness of the prophecy of Moshe. And that's how Rabbi Salvation explains that story as well. So she's being taught that you think you're something that you're not. You think you're the same as Moses. You're not. That's what the leprosy taught her. Story of Kings. Story of Naman, the general, the enemy general. Well, he thinks he's greater than he thinks he's worthy, that the prophet should come out and greet him. And he thinks that his land is better than our land. He doesn't appreciate the land of Israel. After this story, he says, hey, can I buy some dirt? Because I want to make an altar, and I don't want to make an altar in a Gentile land. I need some dirt from this country. This country is such gold. I want some dirt from the country. Like a lot of people have Jerusalem stone, they import it from Israel. picture how expensive that would be to ship a rock, right? Because Ratzu Avaneh, one day the land of Israel will be very valuable. So at first he thinks the land of Israel is a joke. Our rivers are nothing compared to other, more northern rivers. And then he realizes, no, he has to see beneath the surface. The leprosy is telling him to look beneath the surface. There's a young boy underneath that very disturbing exterior. There's a beauty in this underneath that river. There's a curing property, and it's much greater than your country. So he didn't appreciate the land of Israel, and he was taught to appreciate what lies beneath the surface. Gehazi got leprosy. Now, how does Gehazi fit in? He was a servant, and he thought that he could be, like Elisha, but he really was no Elisha at all. Something like that. I had another idea. It slips my mind at the moment, but I'll just put that as a challenge to the audience. Gehazi is also someone who didn't appreciate who he was. That Elisha thought that he was like the next Elijah, and it turns out that he wasn't. It revealed that he was really no good. In his case, when you went beneath the surface, you discovered that Gehazi was no Elisha. Elisha was trying to train him to be the next Elisha, the next Elijah or Elisha, and it turns out he is no. I've met JFK, and you're no JFK. You are no Elisha. You are no Elijah. So that's Gehazi. He doesn't understand. People who know him don't understand that he's not what he purports to be. Perhaps that's Gehazi. However, in the end, these very lepers who you think they're nothing, you think a human being is nothing? He's a leper? No. There's greatness beneath it. There's greatness beneath these lepers. These lepers saved the day. The Jews were starving. They would still be sitting there starving in Shomron. They'd all be dead. Instead, the lepers came and said, hey, by the way, since you kicked us out, we know something you don't know. The enemy went away. They're not there anymore. There's plenty of food. Come get it. And they made a stampede and they went to get the food. They were gorging themselves. So the lepers turned out to bring the salvation. The cornerstone that the builders said, it's no good. What is it? It's the leper. It's no good. Became the cornerstone of the new building. So these lepers, even Gehazi himself, may have been one of those lepers. And it turns out he had gold. There was something he could bring. The rabbis say that they shouldn't have fired Gehazi permanently. The whole chain of Elijah, Elisha, and then Gehazi was broken. There was no more chain. Why? Because they said, Gehazi's no good. He's a piece of garbage. Throw him out, send him out. They ended outside and say, no one's garbage. There's no such thing as a human being who's refuse. Gehazi saved the day. Gehazi was one of the 4 lepers, say the rabbis, who saved the day. You have to look beneath the surface. On the one hand, he's no Elisha, or at least at that point, but in the end, he's not nothing either. You have to look beneath the surface. Uziyahu thinks he's a Kohen. He doesn't understand who he is. He's a king, not a Kohen. He doesn't understand who he is. And now, what about Lashon Hara? What's Lashon Hara? So you think I'm trying to show you that leprosy is about haughtiness, not Lashon Hara. No. My unified theory says that Lashon Hara also fits in. Lashon Hara means that, you know what Jim did yesterday? Did you see what Jim did yesterday? It was really terrible what Jim did yesterday. And isn't that a juicy piece of information I just told you, right? About what Jim did. Because we're much better than Jim, because we didn't do what Jim did yesterday. Jim did what Jim did yesterday. But I didn't, and we didn't, because we're much better. Ultimately, Lashon Hara is not haughtiness. It's lack of self-confidence translating into making you temporarily feel you're better than someone else, a sense of haughtiness, which ultimately makes you depressed that actually you're not good at all, because you're not a good person because you're speaking against others. But the Lashon Hara is about the idea that somehow I'm better than he is, because look at how bad that guy is. So it's a false sense of who you are. It's also a type of haughtiness. Lashon Hara itself is a type of haughtiness. Yeah, I can't explain all these different things. I don't know. The rabbi seemed to throw in the kitchen sink. I'm not sure I can explain all those things, but certainly I can explain Lashon Hara, the Gasis Ruach, the haughtiness. I think we could probably tie in the stinginess too, but for another time. And that's why Rashi says that you have to That's the birds, because they talk too much. He has to lower himself from the tree. Good. All the symbolism we understand. What about Job? Job thinks that he's like God. God says you're not God. God comes at the end. He says, you don't understand anything about the universe. You're not God. You can't talk to me. I'm not on the same level with you. I'm not going to explain to you. I can't explain to you how I run the world. It doesn't work that way. So there's a certain haughtiness there. Whether the haughtiness is about his being too righteous, it could be that he is righteous. That may not be the problem. The thing is, you're righteous, but you're not God. Two different things. And what about the leprosy that's under the walls? So here we say, you have to know who you are, and you have to know who your land is. If you think that the land of Israel is not as good as Syria because their waters are better than your waters, then you have to look more deeply. You have to get leprosy to look more deeply. It's not a punishment, it's a lesson teaching you how to look more deeply, that actually your country is better than the other guy's country because it's special. It's the land of Israel, it's the land of God. And Naaman didn't get that. And the person who has a house, now he's going to get it. She's going to get it, that beneath their house is a real treasure. The land of Israel is not some kind of joke. So we say, well, what is the unified theory of leprosy? It's knowing your identity, who you are. Moshe is not nothing. Miriam is not Moshe. Uziah is not a Kohen. Naaman is not better than the land of Israel. His land is not better than our land. Your wall is not just a plain wall. There's a greater treasure there than you think there is there. So the leprosy is about knowing who you are. Sometimes it's a punishment for thinking you're someone you shouldn't think you are. And sometimes it's just a lesson to tell you, hey, you're better than you think you are. And sometimes it's a reminder of you're not who you think you are. And then also, sometimes it tells us about our land as well, our identity, the land of Israel. That the land of Israel is more special than you think it is. And when Naaman slanders the land of Israel or thinks his land is better than our land, he's got a lesson to learn. And that's the leprosy comes and teaches him that lesson. So in Yom Haatzmaut, we should feel very proud of Israel if we don't feel our identity of knowing who we are, we're the Jewish people. And what the land of Israel is, that it's the land of God, land where there's a certain greater connection to God in the land of Israel. Mysteriously, we don't understand how it works, but that's what it is. That's appreciation of that special land. As we ponder the gift of the land of Israel that's given back to us in our own time, the national level, that we never lost our national connection to it, but now we even legally, in terms of conquest, we actually rule the land of Israel. That land is a very special land. We should never think, Memphis is better, or Mississippi is better, or New York State is better. The land of Israel, with all its little warts or different leprosies you might see on it, it's better than any other land. It's a very special land that is connected to God, and it has a lot of physical features as well, as you can see right behind me right now, that are quite magnificent and nothing to be ashamed of compared to any other land in the whole world. So that's our lesson on leprosy, identity, and Yom Haatzmaut. All right, thank you very much.